Good evening, everyone. And tonight we have the much awaited class on our on Ezekiel, and his symbolic actions. Ezekiel, as I have noted, frequently is noted for his very concrete actions and his very and the idea that he's people are kind of around him, waiting for him, to watching him all the time, and we're going to see that in just a bit with some of his kind of shorter little text. But what we're going to start with is what we have right at the very beginning, and I'm going to remind you, and I feel like I didn't really delve deeply enough into this when we talked about Ezekiel's dedication, but Ezekiel kind of starts with silence, right? So let's take a look at that. Here we are. Actually, no, let me share my screen with that. Okay, everyone sees Ezekiel, right? Great. Okay, so actually, I'm going to go back a chapter here. I had it all set for Ezekiel Daled, for the chapter 4, but this actually starts. It actually starts earlier. What happens is, after Ezekiel's dedication, okay, he's carried back, right, to where it says like this. It says, I'm reading from now chapter 3, verse 14. Okay, this is after Ezekiel has gotten his job, right? He's going to have to go and tell the people what God says to them, whether they listen or not, right? And then a wind carries him. And he says, a wind carried me back, because he was seeing this vision, right? He carries him back to Babylonia, to Tel Aviv, right, which is where he's coming from. Tel Aviv, not the modern Tel Aviv, the ancient Tel Aviv, which is in Babylon. And then he walks, and then I walked bitterly, right, in kind of the anger of my spirit, the heat of my spirit. And the hand of God was strong upon me. Now, we've noted earlier that unlike a lot of other prophets, you don't have quite the same, with Ezekiel, you don't have the kind of, no, I'm not going to prophesy. Well, this is kind of his no, I'm not going to prophesy moment, right? Where he's not happy and God is forcing him, right? And what does he do? Right? And he goes back to those people who are those original exiles, the early exiles from Judea, who are all in this area of Tel Aviv near the river Kvar, and he sits there with them 7 days silent. He doesn't say anything for 7 days, right? So what is going on, right? By him excitement say Shivatim. At the end of 7 days, God speaks to him, and he says, "Son of man, I made you a watchman. I appointed you as a watchman, right? That you should kind of say stuff, right?" And he explains again. We've gone over this section about kind of the philosophy of prophecy in Ezekiel, right? That the idea is that if Ezekiel doesn't warn an evil person, Ezekiel is responsible. But if he warns an evil person, the evil person doesn't listen, the evil person is responsible. So God says to him, listen, I put you there so you should say this stuff, right? And then he says, so he says, okay, now come with me to the valley, and I'll speak to you. And he takes him to the valley, and he says, you know what? God says, you know what? Just shut yourself up in your house. You're going to act like you are in chains, essentially, like you are handcuffed, and you're not going to go out among them. You know what? God says, I get it. You don't want to talk to them. I'm telling you not to talk now. I'm going to keep you from talking. You're not going to talk because they are rebellious people. But then, but when I speak to you, you're going to have to open your mouth. He said, you know what? You weren't talking? Okay, you're not going to talk. Right. You're not going to talk until I give you a prophecy. Then you're going to say that prophecy. Right. So what's going on here? The question is like, is his silence a symbolic act, or is this actually something kind of between him and God, right? Where he's like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to say these horrible prophecies. I'm just going to shut my mouth. And God's like, oh, you know what? Shut your mouth. Yeah, I'm telling you to shut your mouth. You shut your mouth until I tell you to say something. Then you're going to darn well say it. Right. So it's not clear if what those 7 days of silence were for. Right. And then we go right in from this chapter to a whole series of symbolic actions, and which probably are heightened by Ezekiel's silence. In other words, the idea is he's silent and he's going to do all this stuff. Right. And everyone's just going to watch him and they're going to be like, whoa, and again, there's a question, are people watching him or not? Because these are things he's doing in his home, in his house. But it really does seem like people are supposed to be observing him. Okay, we'll show later that there are specific instances where they're supposed to, there's a dialogue that's expected. In this case, we don't always see the dialogue, but it really does seem clear. It really does seem clear that that this is supposed to be seen by other people. It's a symbolic action that they're supposed to kind of take on. Okay, so any questions before we move on to the next chapter? Questions, nothing. Okay, great. All right. So here in our next chapter, now
Miriam?
Yes.
One question.
Sure.
Is the idea of behind what was said to him in Tel Aviv when he was silent for a week that he had nevuot that he was supposed to communicate and he didn't, or was he just expected to say things on his own?
That's what's weird. It's like he's silent for 7 days. Like, you can read it differently than what I just said. You could read it as, I was upset, I was silent for 7 days, and then God said to me, hey, listen, as I said, you're going to be a watchman, and now now I want you to be silent except for this prophecy. Like, it could be that it's not a rebuke. I'm influenced both by Rashi and Rimon Kasher, right, in reading it as a bit of a rebuke. It does kind of say, if we go back, let's go back to the chapter for a sec. Let's go back to that. So he says, it does sound, the way it reads, does sound like, listen, this is your job, right? Hey, I appointed you as a watchman. You're supposed to hear things from me, and then you're supposed to warn them. Maybe the idea was the first kind of, in the dedication, you could kind of read that also as a part of prophecy, right? And he's like, I've made you a prophet, and you're going to tell them, listen to God, right? When what you would expect is the guy to go back and say, hey guys, I'm a prophet, God's not happy, right? And he doesn't. He goes back and he's with them 7 days in silence. Right? And God's like, okay, that's the way it's going to be. Okay, this is how we're going to do the silence thing for maximum effect, right? And that works. And again, it's a way of, and there's a question, is God actually saying, okay, I get you want to be quiet and I'm working with you here? Or is it, oh, I understand you're quiet, but you're quiet, this is on my time. I'm telling you when to be quiet and when to speak, right? So now we're going to go into the series of symbolic actions we have in. Yes.
Is this his first prophecy entirely?
This is right after the dedication. We're not. This is not a Yeshayahu deal where we're starting with chapter 6. This is his dedication, right? This is him. If we look from the beginning, right? This is him becoming a prophet, right? He has this heavenly vision, and he's given his mission, and he goes back and he's silent 7 days, right? So this is we're in the beginning of Yechezkel's mission as a prophet, okay?
So
However,
he never tells people he's a prophet. He just starts acting weird.
this is the thing. So I think that they already respect him. I think they're already paying attention to him. I think he's already pretty important, because there is this idea that he's doing this. He's supposed to be in his house doing this, and yet this is supposed to have impact. Now you could read it differently. You could read it that his actions here are actually supposed to do something, right? In other words, that his symbolic actions are not meant to symbolize something to people. They're actually supposed to do something. We can discuss that. Let's read it together, and then we can discuss that possibility. The big question is he performing this or not? Is he performing this, or is he just doing it? Okay, and that has a different meaning. Those have a different implication for what this symbolic action is for, right?
The implication is that he has status as a community leader before he officially becomes a prophet.
To me, I'll tell you, he does so much nutty stuff right in the beginning, and then the elders are coming to him for prophecy. Like, it seems to me like he must have had an awful lot of like kind of respect in his account that he could do this stuff. Like, unless this was really popular stuff to do. Unless when you did this, they're like, wow, this guy's for real. I mean, he's eating poop. Like, I'm sorry, I always go to the poop. I know, but it's like you're like, okay, wow, he is not kidding around, which is true. He's not kidding around, right? So maybe that's actually building up his street cred, right? I don't know. It's very hard to tell how they looked at these sort of actions. Did these sort of actions mean, oh wow, this guy's for real, or were these actions like, oh wow, this guy is crazy, right? Maybe these actions were their way of people saying, oh, wow, this guy's for real. We need to take this guy seriously. Okay, so
Miriam, there's
Yeah.
a therapeutic technique called paradoxic intent, where someone is afraid of something and you tell them to do that more. So I don't know, someone's afraid of
I was actually thinking of it more as like, it's also a thing you do with little kids, right?
Right.
Okay, yeah, sure. You're like, yeah, eat it yourself. And God does it with Bnei Israel, right? You want meat? You're gonna eat meat till you're sick, right?
Okay.
But it does seem like I mean, it's true that one imagines that it was set up of these actions plus silence have a special impact as well. And it was something that you say, okay, Yechezkel, it's hard for you to say these things. Okay, you're going to act this out, right? And then maybe this is going to kind of break you in. Maybe that's also part of it. But let's take a look. So it says, "Vata ben adam kafacha leveina v'natata ota lefanecha." Okay, take a brick, like a baked clay brick, and put it in front of you. Now, it seems like it's not baked yet because he's going to carve a city into it. They're going to carve a city. They're going to carve Jerusalem. They actually found a brick of Nippur, a brick with Nippur carved into it, like a skyline of Nippur. So this is something that would not have been completely foreign in ancient times, to carve a city into a brick. And that's what he's going to do. So you are going to build a siege around it, like kind of siege engine around it. You're going to have kind of the hill that you would use to kind of, so that you could attack down. You're going to make the ramp so that you're going to do all the stuff that you would do around when besieging a city. Okay. And you're going to have camps with battering rams, right? So you're going to build this whole little kind of dollhouse version of a city siege, right? And now you're also going to take a frying pan, like an iron pan, and you're going to put it as an iron wall between you and the city. And the question is, okay, what does that mean? Maybe it means that like this is the wall between God and the city, right? Like God's like not paying attention to the city. It's as if it's walled off. God's not taking care of them, right? That's one possibility. Barbanel says, but it isn't super clear. So here, okay, so there's a siege, okay? Now we're moving on to another symbolic action, okay? So there's a siege on Jerusalem. This is something that's going to happen, okay? And now you are going to lie down on your left side, and you are going to put the sin of the house of Israel on it. In other words, it seems like on your left side. The number of days that you lie, you're going to be you're going to be bearing their sin. So the question is, does this represent the sin that they're sinning, or does it represent the punishment for their sin? Okay, let's take a look at how many years it is. And I'm giving them to you according to the number of days, 390 days. And you should bear the sin of the house of Israel. Here it seems like we're not really talking about punishment. It seems like we're talking about the sin itself. Okay. If we're talking, and this is the question. So there's a you know that I like Ramon Kasher's commentary on Ezekiel. And he says that he thinks that in the original version, you just had him, that there were two different traditions that have been combined here. One had him lying on his left side and one had him lying on his right side. And it wasn't that he lay on his left side and then lay on his right side. We'll talk about it. We'll see that later on, it only refers to him lying on his left side. And that why? Because in general, when it says Beit Yisrael in Yechezkel, it means both Judea and Israel. In other words, it's what we say when we say Bnei Yisrael, we don't mean just the house of, just the northern kingdom of Israel. We mean all of Israel, right? So that's generally how Yechezkel uses it as well. So if you take 390 days, 390 years, and you're talking about the whole house of, the whole, including Judea, so you would be saying that even from the time of David HaMelech, of King David, they were sinning. They've been sinning the whole way through, even from the beginning they've been sinning the whole way through till now. If you're saying this is just the house of Israel, in other words, we're talking about the sin of the house of Israel until the Assyrian exile of the northern kingdom, then you're counting it from around the period of the judges. You're like, okay, they were sinning from the time of the period of the judges until they were exiled by Assyria. And you'll finish those days, and then you're going to lie on your right side a second time, right? Right? And then you're going to bear the sin of the house of Yehuda for 40 days, a day per year, right? Yom HaShanah is a bit of the 40 days, by the way, they're an echo of the sin of the Meraglim, the sin of the spies in the desert, right? And the punishment is, of course, the 40 days. And then it uses this language of 1 day per year. 1 day, you like 1 year. In other words, that they went for 40 days, and now they have to have a year per day as punishment that they're going to be wandering in the desert, and they're all going to die out, right? So this is echoing that. The 40, if we say that this is representing sin and not, let's say, punishment, not say the length of the exile, which would not be very long. 40 years is not that long in exile, really. It's worse than nothing, much worse than nothing, but still. The sin for 40 years. So let's say Menashe, right? If you're saying, okay, we're paying for Menashe, okay. Ve'el mitzor Yerushalayim tachin panecha uzroacha chasufa v'nibeta aleh, and you're going to turn yourself to the siege of Jerusalem. You kind of built, right? And you're going with your arm bared. Your arm bared, that's a symbol of like war, right? To have your arm bared in battle, right? And you are going to prophesy against it. V'hinei natati alecha avotim v'lo te'afech mitzidcha el tzidecha ad kalotcha yemei mitzurecha. You're not going to flip sides, right? The whole time. It's going to be like you're in chains. You won't flip sides, right? You're going to be on your left side, then you're going to be on your right side. No flipping, okay? Okay, now, so that's, okay, so we had, so far, siege on Jerusalem. Yechezkel bearing the sin, right, of the house of Israel / the house of Judah, right? Showing how long they've been sitting for, all right? And now we're going into another stage. Okay, so you're going to take this whole combination of grains, right? Wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet, right? And spelt. You're going to put them in one pot. You're going to make them into bread. What does that show? That shows it's like in the time of siege, really the beginning of a siege, you still have grain, but you don't have that much wheat. You're just taking any grain you can get and you're mixing it up into a bread, right? So that's already not good, okay? So this is, and then it says, and the days in which you're lying on your side, 390 days you should eat it. And this again is why Rimon Kasher says the whole right side has been added, because here it's only referring to the days on his left side, right? The days on his left side, 390 days. That's how long he's going to be eating these cakes, which are the sort of things you would eat during a siege. Now here I want to, let me find the reference that you know the right number of calories we're talking about. So you, how much are you going to eat? You're going to eat 20 shekels per day. 20 shekels per day is about 400 to 800 calories. All right, because you have, if you say the heavy shekel in Mesopotamia was 16 grams, in which case he's eating 320 grams a day. All right. So it would have been if you look at the archaeological finds, the average weight of a shekel would be 11.39 grams, right? But at any rate, he's eating not a lot of calories. He's eating about between 400 to 800 calories. All right. In other words, he's eating very little like you would eat in a siege. He's also not moving, which perhaps makes it easier to survive on this amount of food, which is not easy, right? And you're also going to just drink a very small amount of water, 1/6 of a hin, which is a hin is about 1.1 liters. Right, is about 1.1. Okay, so there are different possibilities for the hin. It could be 1.1 liters, it could be 1.84 liters, or it could be 3.3 liters. But what that means is he's not going to have any more than 0.55 liters, right? Now, the average amount that you would normally, I shouldn't say the average, what you would normally need to drink is 2.5 liters a day. And he's allowed maximum like 0.55 liters, something like that. So this is really not a lot of water. So he's supposed to be living like he's in a siege, right? He's showing everyone, this is the siege, okay? And just in case we missed it, okay? And then he says, Vugat so'orim tochlena, and you should eat a barley cake. V'hi b'geleleit se'at hadamtu genelei nehem. And here we have spelled out for us the performative aspect. In front of them, you should roll it in human excrement. Okay, wait, or it's going to get a little bit better than that, right? But the idea is, I want the people to see. It's not even just not such great grain. It's not even just small amounts. It's going to be mixed up in human excrement. Okay. Vayomer Adonai, kacha yochlu bnei Israel et lachmam tamei bagoyim asher adichem sham. And he says, this is what the children of Israel are going to eat. They're going to eat their bread impure among the nations that I send them to. Now, this is another aspect, okay? We had the crummy eating during the siege. This is different. This is after the exile. All of a sudden, we're jumping to the exile. We're going to jump right back. In the exile, people are going to eat their food impure, right? This is one of the things that it's always interesting to read because we've got such a modern mentality. But one of the horrors of exile is that you're not going to be able to be, you're going to be among a people that are worshiping gods you don't know, that are eating impure things, and you're going to be eating impurity. That is part of the horror of exile, right? But Yechezkel has something to say about this. V'omar, aha Adonai Elohim, hine nafshi lo metuma'a univela utrefa lo achalti min urai v'ad ata v'lo ba b'fi b'sar pigul, right? He says, oh, woe, my Lord God, right? Here by my soul, but here my soul has not been, not by my soul, here my soul has not been made impure. I've never eaten any kind of carrion from my youth till now, right? I've never eaten anything that was like not properly slaughtered, and no impure flesh has gone into my mouth, right? And now you're telling me essentially to eat impure food. Vayomer Eli, so God can be reasonable, right? Vayomer Eli, re'eh natati lecha et tzvi'ei habakar, tachagel alei hadam, vasitet lachmecha aleihem. He says, no problem. I will give you cow pies instead. Not impure, from pure cows, you are safe from impurity, but you're still going to do this apparently as a performative action, okay? Vayomer Eli, Ben Adam hineni shover mateh lechem b'Yerushalayim, v'achlu lechem b'mishkal u'b'da'aga, u'mayim b'sura u'b'shimamon yishtu, l'man yachsaru lechem v'mayim v'nashamu ish v'achiv v'namaku ba'amonam. He says, listen, and this he's going back. So you had this whole little interlude about the disgusting bread, right? That seems to symbolize exile, but most of this we're actually talking about during the siege. So he goes back to the kind of the food during the siege. He's like, I am going to break off the staff of bread from Jerusalem, and they're going to eat bread by measure and with worry or you like concernedly. They have to kind of really measure it out, and water with water by measure and with distress. They're going to drink, right? Like Yechezkel is going to be eating and drinking all these days. All right. In order that they are going to miss the bread and water, they're gonna miss the bread and water, and they're going to. Each person is going to just be so distressed. And they will kind of they say pine away. I'll use pine away with their sin, right? So they're going to have time. This is the thing with the siege, right? Is that there's a lot of time. Right? They're eating, they can barely eat, they can barely drink, and all they've got is time, right? To feel guilty for their sin. And this is what Yechezkel's doing. He's a tremendous amount of time lying on his side near the siege of Jerusalem and eating barely any bread and water, and also eating bread that's made differently. I'm not even getting to the disgusting one. And the disgusting bread that he's eating is a symbol of the exile, right? So that's again a question of does the disgusting bread, does that symbolic action belong here? Or did it happen at another time and it's being put here because it's already talking about him eating, right? Because the disgusting bread is talking about the exile where you're going to be among impure nations. Nations were eating impurity and you're going to eat impure things. And that's a horrible thing, right? Whereas the rest of the stuff is talking about the siege and how limited your possibilities are going to be during a siege, and how much, and again, I think it also shows how much time they're going to have to live this way and to think about what they've done, right? Okay, any questions? Because we just did a whole bunch of actions. Any questions before we move on?
I'm just wondering if back then they knew anything about clinical depression, because a lot of the behaviors that Yechezkel is doing, just lying there doing nothing, eating very, very little, no appetite. These are all, signs of clinical depression. And I'm sure Ezekiel knew absolutely nothing about primate biology. But I remember when I was a zookeeper 37 years ago, they told us that if a chimpanzee was eating its own excrement, that was the surest sign of clinical depression.
Oh, that's so sad. Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, here, just a second, Robin. Here, it's supposed to be weird. This is supposed to be something weird. It's not supposed to be something where everyone just goes like, "Oh, he's gotten so sad." He's gotten so sad since he left Jerusalem. It's supposed to be weird and attention drawing. People are going to be like, "What? You're mixing in excrement?" Right? People are supposed to be like, it's people are supposed to see it and like and kind of stand back, because again, he's there, and we're going to go straight into, we're going to have another symbolic action, and then we're going to go straight into the prophecies that this is connected to, right? So as opposed to like, there are theories like when Yonah goes and sleeps in the belly of the ship, like how is he sleeping? I used to think that was supposed to show depression, but now I think it's supposed to show his total apathy. Right? But like there you could say, okay, why is he sleeping? In this case, it really does seem like very purposeful stuff. And Yechezkel seems to be a talker and a doer. So that's what you would want, like you would expect it to be. It's supposed to be unusual. Put it that way. It's supposed to be unusual. Robin, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I'm asking, did these things as described in chapter 4 actually take place? Did Yechezkel spend a year and a half lying on his side?
Right. So again, it's yeah. So this is the thing. Well, the excrement thing, I could see. I mean, it's disgusting, but I could see someone doing it if they felt that this was what they needed to do. But excuse me again for I don't like saying things not in the proper name, and this is also from Ramon Kasher, which is he thinks he's like, he was lying, but not steady lying the entire time. Like he was lying, like, okay, he got up in the morning and he's like, okay, time to lie down. And he lay, he went to the bathroom and he did stuff. Like it wasn't constant, because he had to be a human being, and his limbs couldn't atrophy, right? I say that when we get to the chapter where he has a wife, I was like, his wife dies. And I'm like, oh, of course he had a wife. Of course, that's how he could lie on his side for like 390 days. But yeah, right. So if you say, okay, he was lying there, but within reason, right? Like he got up, he took he did something and then he lay down, right? And then like he got like, I could see it. I could see someone doing, like, people do nutty stuff. I mean, there are people who live in unbelievable conditions. Like, if you ever see like in India, the different, like some of them are kind of hard for me to see, like the guy who has like his arm up forever. And then like at this point, he can't like lower it because it's like atrophied that way. That's like, right. For me, I find that very, very distressing to see, but people do a lot physically. I mean, not me, but people can really tolerate a lot physically. So I could see him doing it, especially if you say, okay, he was doing it like not in a completely nutty way, like he was doing it within like during work hours or something. Right?
I would sort of understand it as something that he was doing as a Navi, something he was doing for show. So he would only do this when people were coming to visit him.
Yeah, but that's so hypocritical. Oh, they're knocking on the door. Quick, lie down. That's, I don't like. I personally think that kind of takes the whole point out of it. Like he has to kind of do the thing, but anyway. So yeah. So I think if you say, like, there are ways you can say, okay, it never happened because it's impossible. You can say, oh, he did it in a way that it was possible. Like he did it in a way, with bathroom breaks and stuff.
I assume he's doing all this in a public place, right?
Well, what's weird is he's supposed to be in his house, so it's not clear. Is by God saying do this stuff? Does that mean go out and do it, right? Which could be, right? So in other words, because previously God's like, okay, stay inside your house and don't say anything until I tell you something. So it could be that this action is already, so go out, right? It could be that, in fact, and again, this is mainly because later in the book, right, the elders do go to visit him. Elders go to consult with him. And the question is, how important is he? Does he have these visitors all the time that people are seeing? Or is he doing it like outside his house, right? Outside where people can see, which is, of course, what you would expect, especially for such an elaborate kind of, especially the siege and the city and the little siege engines around it. You kind of want people to see that in public. So either one's a possibility. Either he's doing it in his house and there really is like a steady stream of people, right? Or he's doing it outside, you know, and by God telling him to do this, this was like, okay, now leave your house and do this. Okay. So let's continue on with some more, you know, good stuff right in the next chapter. So now I'm in chapter 5, Ezekiel Hay, and it says, "Vata ben adam kach lecha cherev chada, ta'ar hagalavim tikachen alach, v'avarta al roshcha v'al zekanecha, v'lakach lecha moznei mishgal v'chilaktam." So you are going to cut hair off your head and off your beard, and you're going to divide it precisely, right? Shlishit ba'or tav'ir b'toch ha'ir kimlot yimei hamatzor. Okay, when the days of the siege, in 1/3 of it, you're going to burn inside the city. One assumes like next to the brick in the whole siege, in the middle of the whole siege thing. When the days of the siege are complete, and the other 1/3 of the hair, you are going to smite it with a sword, right? Around outside of the city. Right? And the 3rd, you're just gonna blow out, scatter it to the wind, and I will kind of draw a sword behind them, right? Okay. And you should take a few hairs and put them like in your sleeve, right? ומהם עוד תיקח, ושלחת אותם אל תוך האש, ושרפת אותם באש, ממנו תצא אש כל בית ישראל. Okay? And he says, even of those few, right, that you kind of secreted on your person, you should take a few and throw them into the fire, right? And that's how the fire is going to come forth to the whole house of Israel. All right? What is this going to mean? Of course, what it means is you're going to have some people who are going to die, right, in the fire that ends the siege of Jerusalem, right? A 1/3 are going to die by sword in battle around it, and a 1/3 are going to be scattered to the wind, right? Of the few who manage to survive, some of those are also going to die. Okay, so this is a pretty crummy symbolic action. Okay, and it's going to go right into the it's not going to match the prophecy exactly. Okay, we're going to see that it doesn't match the prophecy exactly, and part of the thing is that they seem to be kind of complementary. All right, that the symbolic action and the prophecy kind of each add something that isn't in the other. Okay, so here we go. Lachen, okay, here, sorry. Ko amar Adonai Elohim zot Yerushalayim b'toch hagoyim samtiha u'svivotah aratzot. And so God says, this is Jerusalem. I've put her in the middle of nations. Lands are around her. V'temer et mishpatai l'rish'ah min hagoyim ve'et chukotai min haratzot asher svivoteha. And she has rebelled against my laws for wickedness, more than nations, and against my laws more. It isn't clear. Does it mean more than the lands and more than the nations, or because she's learning from, like, she's kind of taking also, like, she's learning from the nations around, right? Also, because they have rejected my laws and they have not gone by my ordinances. Okay. לכן, כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, ין המנחם מן הגויים אשר סביבותיכם, בחוקותיי לא הלכתם ואת משפטיי לא עשיתם, ובמשפטי הגויים אשר סביבותיכם לא עשיתם. Okay, so this is saying that you're much worse than the nations around you. He says you've been worse than the nations that are around you. You haven't gone according to my laws. You haven't kept my ordinances, and you haven't kept the nation's ordinances either. All the general ethical laws you have not kept. In other words, there are the and now we're saying God's laws you haven't kept, but you haven't kept any other kind of ethical law either. You haven't kept any decent sort of law, right? So it's not just that, oh, we're not so good for Israel. You're not so good for anyone, okay? You're worse than everyone else, okay? לכן כה אמר אדוני אלוהים, הנני עלייך גאני, עשיתי בתוכך משפטים לעיני הגויים. So he says, so God says, therefore I am against you. I am also against you. Not just these nations that you're worried about. I myself, God, am also against you, and I'm going to bring down the law on you in front of the nations. And I'm going to do things that I haven't done before, and I won't do it again because of all your disgustingness, right? לכן אבות יאכלו בנים בתוכך ובנים יאכלו אבותם ועשיתי בך שבטים וזריתי את כל שאריתך לכל רוח. Therefore fathers will eat sons inside you and sons will eat their fathers, and I will do judgment on you, and I will scatter what's left, your remainder, to the wind. Okay, now I want to say something here again, and we've said this before. It's a classic trope in a siege, right? The parents eat their children. Here we're also having children eat their parents. If you ever read, what is that? Remember the expedition? What's the name of it? With the D, where they all had to eat each other. It was in Sierra Nevada. They were going to the Sierra Nevada mountains on their way to California.
It was Donner Expedition.
The Donner Expedition, thank you. The Donner Expedition. And one of the things that children who survived had nightmares were there were kids who ate their mother. Their mother, she was dead already, but there were kids who had no choice. In general, like it's one of the, it's something that's so horrific you can't even imagine it, especially when in a siege, the trope of it in a siege is that this is voluntary. In other words, that they want to do this, which is that much more horrific, right? Okay, לכן חי אני, נאום אדוני אלוהים, אם לא יען את מקדשי תימת, וכל שקודשייך וכל טובתייך, וגם אני אגרע ולא תחוס עיני, וגם אני לא אחמו. And here he's going into another thing. So before it was laws, right? Now it's saying you defiled my temple. So, and because you defiled my temple with all your disgusting things, I'm not going to diminish what I'm going to do to you. I'm not going to have any pity on you. Okay. Now the question is, what are the disgusting things? The truth is that elsewhere in Ezekiel, it looks pretty clear like this is idol worship. They're actually worshiping idols within the temple precincts. That's what Ezekiel describes in other chapters. Okay. So this is, it sounds like you could have read it like, oh, you're defiling the temple just by doing impurities and then sacrificing. It seems like not, or like doing sins, like even ethical sins, right? And therefore defiling the temple. It seems probably this is actually talking about actual idol worship. So what's going to happen? And again, this doesn't quite match the symbolic action. Shlishitech b'dever yamutu uvarav yichlu b'tochech v'shlishit b'cherev yiplu sivotayich v'shlishit l'chol ruach ezareh b'cherev arik acharehem. So here it's a third is going to die of disease and hunger within the city. So a third is, as opposed to the fire at the end of the siege, right? So a third is going to die of pestilence and hunger. A third is going to die of the sword surrounding you, and a third is going to be scattered to the wind. And I'm gonna take my sword out of the sheath behind them. In other words, they won't be able to return. Right? V'chala api והניחותי חמתי בהם, והנחמתי, וידעו כי אני אדוני, דיברתי בקנאתי, בחלותי, חמתי בם. Right? And I will finish my anger on them. You're actually kind of expecting this to kind of come like, okay, and then I'm gonna, forgive them, whatever. That's not what's gonna happen, right? I'm gonna spend my anger on them, and I'm gonna calm down, and they're gonna know that I'm God, and I spoke in my zealousness, and I finished my anger with them. I was angry, and I did it, right? And I am going to give you over to ruin and shame among the nations that are around you for the eyes of every passersby, right? It's going to be a shame and also kind of a lesson for the nations that are around you. When I do this sort of rulings against you, right, in anger, in anger and wrath, and with rebukes of anger, I am God, I have spoken, right? And again, when I send the arrows of hunger against you, and they're going to be for destruction, that I'm going to send to destroy you, and the hunger is hunger, right? And I'm going to break the staff of bread, right? And finally, in case you haven't caught it already, the hunger and the pestilence, the awfulness, and that. And I'm going to release on you hunger and bad animals, and they're going to kill your loved ones, and disease and blood will pass among you, and I'm going to bring a sword against you. I am God, I have spoken. Okay, so this whole thing, you had this whole big symbolic action, and this is what it means. Okay, what it means is destruction is coming. You have sinned, right? So what you had with Ezekiel and symbolic action, note the very different feel, I have to say, between the action and the prophecy. Okay, the action was like, okay, this is what it's like to live in a siege. Long time, right? Eating very little water, having very little bread. And if you want to combine it with the thing about the exile, eating things that you would never eat normally, right? As maybe a sign of what's going to be in the future. Okay, there's some of them then with the hair, some of them are going to die this way, some of them are going to die that way. Almost all of them are going to die. Some of them are going to be exiled, and then a very, very few are going to survive. And then there's this horrible, horrible prophecy of death and destruction, and death and destruction, and horrible, horrible death and destruction. Why? Because you sinned. You sinned so badly. And here it's not talking about the passage of time, right? Which is what Ezekiel is doing. Ezekiel's action is you've sinned for so long. The prophecy is, what did you do? You didn't do any sort of you didn't keep any sort of ethical law. You worshiped idols in the temple precinct. This is it. This is it. You guys are dead. You think God's not going to punish you for this? God's going to punish you, and you're not like nothing you've ever seen before. Okay, so we have both aspects of it, and you can understand why Ezekiel would have wanted to maybe stay silent, right? But this is his job. His job is to tell them this, right? That this is what's going to happen. I will pause for questions now. Yes.
Hello. It's not a question. I just want to point out, the idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse,
Yeah.
which is a Christian idea,
Yeah.
in the book of John, but it is based on that verse. The 4 things that will happen are these 4 things.
Oh, I thanks for pointing that out. I actually did not know that.
So you have plague and war, which we've done 2 of those so far, and
Yeah.
then you move on to plague, hunger and wild animals, and that's what the 4 horsemen are. Those 4 things.
So it's hunger. It's hunger. Pestilence. Isn't death one of them? Isn't
Well,
it
no, we've had plague and war, which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you move on to the next 2, which is hunger and wild animals.
Wild animals is one of the horsemen?
That's right. It comes from here. You see, if you read, it's the chapter, the book. It's the book of Revelation. I'm sorry, not John.
Yes, Book of Revelation. That's why I was surprised you said John. So the
Right,
Book of Revelation, right?
So
right.
the horsemen come from Zechariah because he talks about 4 horsemen going around the world.
Yeah.
4 terrible things are these.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Just so you should know.
Yeah. We all draw from Yechezkel. Okay. Any other questions? I see I've used a lot of time on this, but honestly, this is the kind of the bulk of the symbolic actions we're talking about here. The other ones are just small references here and there, which kind of show that everyone's watching it. The point of Yechezkel doing things is for people to ask. In this case, we didn't have that dialogue. We didn't have people asking, what are you doing? Because he's doing this long drawn out thing, again, apparently silently. And then he gives the prophecy, which is supposed to have extra impact once you've seen him doing this. I think that a lot, okay, just a second, Cheryl. I think that part of the reason that it's important to see this is to kind of, the point of the concreteness is to bring it home. No, this is actually going to happen. You saw it happen. You see it happen. This is going to happen. And then you hear the prophecy. Yes, Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you answered this earlier and I missed it, but he's in Babylon and these prophets are against Jerusalem. So how do these symbolic actions get known in Jerusalem?
Well, first of all, there is a certain amount of correspondence, but it's less for it to be known in Jerusalem and more for it to be known in the exile with him in Babylon. I'm going to remind you, he's with the first exile. Yechezkel's with this whole large group of Jews who are in the first exiles. They're the nobility of Jerusalem, nobility, the craftsmen, the best of Jerusalem, and it's a large group. They have this very difficult situation where they've been exiled. There are still Jews living in Jerusalem. And at least according to Yechezkel, at one point, the Jews in Jerusalem were like, yeah, you guys were exiled because you're evil, but we're great. And now we get your stuff. Now we get the land and you guys are out. Now, the people who are with Yechezkel, they don't know. It's interesting because we take so much for granted. For example, we take for granted that you can live outside of the land of Israel and still be a Jew, right? This is not something that you would take for granted, right? Before the destruction of the first temple or immediately after the destruction of the first temple. It's not obvious that there's a meaning to be a Jew or kind of an Israelite who worships God, right? Outside of the land of Israel and away from your temple, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Right? So here you have this group, and for this group, it's even worse because just they were exiled. It's not even like everyone was exiled. Everyone wasn't exiled. They're in exile. There are a lot of people left in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's still a functioning city, right? The temple's still standing, right? Mm-hmm. And here they've been exiled. Does that mean they've been cut out of the history of the children of Israel? Are they out of the picture? Right? Does that mean that they've been rejected by God, but hey, that's still the nation, and they've simply been, they have to just, that's it? And the answer is no, you haven't, and you have a future, and you have a future as Israel, right? And the temple's going to be destroyed because of the terrible sins of the people of Judea, which of course the people of Israel, like Yechezkel calls them the people of Israel. But the people of Jerusalem and the people of in general of the whole kingdom of Judea who have been sinning, and they've been sinning in both ways in terms of morality, and they've been sinning in terms of idol worship. And for that, the temple is going to be destroyed. Now, that's not to be a comfort to the people who are listening. They are tremendously distressed. This is their life, right? These are like, a lot of them are priests. A lot of them, they want to go back. They want the temple to survive, right? But they need to understand it's not going. This is where things are heading. Things are heading to destruction, right? So Yirmiyahu has a different issue in the city of Jerusalem. Yechezkel has another challenge in Tel Aviv in Babylon, right? Where they've got a bunch of people who don't know is it over, and they also do think that the temple's going to survive. Only they have been exiled, right? There's a king in Jerusalem. There's a king of the Davidic line in Jerusalem, right? So they're not to say to them, oh, but it's going to be over. There's going to be a siege. Everything's going to be destroyed. That's pretty horrible, right? You can say, well, why, and it's only part of what they need to hear, right? So that was kind of a long answer to your question, but
No, it's a good answer to the question. But how much do Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu overlap?
time-wise, quite a bit, but talking-wise, not at all. Like, I shouldn't say that. They both talk about, and I've said this before, they both quote the same phrase, right? The father ate unripe grapes, and the teeth of the sons are dulled, right? So both of them talk about those phrases and they react to it. Yirmiyahu says, and what that means is we're being punished for our father's sins. That's what it means. And Yirmiyahu quotes the phrase and says, in the end time, that's not going to be true anymore. Yechezkel quotes the phrase and says, that's not true. That's not true now. That's not how the world works. That's not how God works for the world. You do not pay for your father's sins. It doesn't work that way, says Yechezkel, while Yirmiyahu says in the future, it won't work that way. There's very little in terms of, there doesn't seem to be any sort of correspondence between Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. And in fact, it would be kind of a waste of Yirmiyahu's time to write to Yechezkel because he doesn't need to convince Yechezkel of anything, right? Yirmiyahu has enough trouble just trying to A, stay alive, B, prophesy from prison, and C, try to get people to believe that Jerusalem is actually going to fall. And then once it's about to fall, to say what are we going to do, in the future?
Okay, how long is Yechezkel in Babylon before he starts prophesying?
Oh, good question. Let's see what it says. I think it just tells us, actually. Here we are. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, I think it's the 30th year of the king. So I don't know how long he's been there. I don't remember. I'll have to look at it, like exactly what year this is, how long he's been. I don't think it's been that long.
This is the 5th year of the exile of the
But it does say it, where it is, yeah. Okay.
Next verse.
All right, there, thank you. So it's the 5th year of the exile, thank you. Thank you, yeah. I thought it said it, right? Just like, I stopped reading too early. Yeah, so it's the, I do want to say that Yirmiyahu does send messages to the exiles in Babylon. It's not that there's no correspondence at all. He sends supposedly a message to them, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of indication of any sort of correspondence between Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel. Again, Yirmiyahu is trying to get them not to rebel against Babylon in Jerusalem, right? That's the thing that Yirmiyahu is trying very hard to do, and to get them to believe that if they do so, they will be destroyed. Right? Yechezkel doesn't have that role at all because Yechezkel's in Babylon, right? He's not talking to anyone who's deciding whether to rebel or not to rebel, right? Okay, so moving right along, some very quick passages that show you that Yechezkel has this performative role. Okay, so here we have that you should say, he says, God said, spoke to me saying, Ben Adam lachmecha b'ra'ash tochel umeimecha b'rogza u'v'da'agat tishteh, right? So eat your bread like shaking, right? And also your water, eat it like, drink it like worriedly, right? And then you're supposed to explain to the people of the land what this means. In other words, to say this is you're saying the people of Jerusalem, people who are still in the land, they are going to eat their bread with worry, they're going to drink their water with distress, because the land is going to be destroyed, right? Because of the evil activity of the people who live there, okay? And the cities will be destroyed, etc. And here's another example, another quick example. And here we actually see with the dialogue. It says, it says, you son of man, sigh, right? With whatever breaking of your loins means, maybe just bent over, right? And with bitterness, you should sigh before them. And vayaki yomu elecha ama tanenach. And when they say to you, when they ask you, what are you sighing about? V'amarta el shmu'a kiva'a v'names kolev v'rafucho yadayim v'chiatacho ruah v'chol birkayim telach namayim hinei va v'niyata nu'um Adonai Elohim. And you should say it because of the news that's coming, right? Every heart will melt and the hands will be weak and the spirit will faint, will stop, and all the and all the knees will be like water, right? It's coming and it will be, right? What is that news? Of course, it's that Jerusalem has fallen. Now, here's another example. Again, this is a longer one, which we're going to do very quickly. Let me think, should I just read this one also? No, let's just, here, God says to Yechezkel, Ben Adam, hineni lokech mimchat machmad einecha b'magefa, v'lo tispod v'lo tivkeh v'lo tavod imatecha. He says, Son of man, I am going to take the delight of your eyes from you by plague. You are not going to eulogize, or you're not going to mourn her, you're not going to cry, and you're not going to shed a tear, right? Hanek dom, metim eve lo taseh, percha chavosh alecha, unalecha tasim baraglecha, v'lo tatal safam, v'lechem anashim lo tochel. You are not going to do anything of mourning. You're going to be silent. You're going to sigh in silence, right? You're not going to do any of the things of mourning. You're going to wear your headpiece. You're going to put your shoes on. You're not going to you're not going to cover your lip in sadness. I guess this is supposed to be a sign of horror, I think, usually is when you do this. But you're not going to eat people's bread. I think that people aren't supposed to you're not going to eat stuff that people bring you, right? And I spoke to all the people in the morning, but tamat ishti ba'arav, and my wife died in the evening. In the morning, I did what I was commanded. Okay. The people already know when Yechezkel does something, this means something about us. Because he's doing something weird, this means something for us, right? The people said to me, why don't you tell us what these things mean for us that you're doing, right? People already know Yechezkel, right? He says the word of God was to me, saying, Emor lebeit Yisrael ko amar Shalom Kim yinei machalel emikdashi guon uschem machmad enechem umachmal nafshechem uvnechem uvnotechem asher azavtem b'cher v'yipolu v'asitem kasher asiti asafam lo ta'atu v'lechem anashim lo tochelu. So essentially, I'm going to summarize. So this is what I'm going to do to my temple. I am going to desecrate my temple, which was the height of your strength. It was your pride, right? The joy of your eyes, right? The longing of your souls. And your sons and daughters who you've left behind in Jerusalem shall die by the sword, right? In case that's not enough, your children are also going to die because you were exiled in your children's state. They're going to die by the sword, okay? And you are going to do what I did. You're not going to mourn. You're not going to mourn. You're going to keep everything and keep doing everything as usual, right? You are going to feel it because of your sins, right? In other words, you're not going to get to cry. No. You don't get to cry now. You don't get to eulogize now. This is your sins. Now you sit and stew in it. You're just going to sit and stew in it. And you're going to groan each one to the next one. You guys, only you understand what's going on. You're in Babylon. No one gets what's going on. No one else understands. You're just going to sit and you're going to stew in your sin and you're going to moan to each other. Yechezkel's a sign. Everything that he did now for his wife that he couldn't mourn, you're not going to be able to mourn for the temple. Right? You're just going to have to sit and not do anything and feel it inside, right? that is there a punishment greater than that? Now, there are pretty bad punishments, but that's the idea. With this horrible punishment, you're not even going to be able to mourn. You're just going to have to sit with it and know that it was your fault, right? And this is interesting because the idea is, how can you imagine how horrible it's going to be for the temple to be destroyed? He's lost his wife, right? So how horrible can it, like that is supposed to visit that horror, like that it's supposed to be horrible, right? And finally, and so this is an example of all these symbolic actions for sadness and horror and these things that are going to happen with horrible, to bring home just how horrible it's going to be, so people know, and this is to create that impact on them. Okay. However, after the destruction, we start getting many prophecies in Ezekiel, of course, of hope, of comfort and hope. And here we also have a symbolic action. This is right after the prophecy of the dry bones, which we're not doing now. And I know we're over time. I'm going to close this soon. But right after the prophecy of the dry bones, which is amazing, and I will do in a later class, he says to Ezekiel, he says, "Vatak ben adam kachacha etz echad uchtov alav liYehuda u'vnei Yisrael chaverav lekach etz echad uchtov alav liYosef etz Ephraim v'chol beit Yisrael chaverav." So you were going to take one stick and write on it like Yehuda, and on the other stick you're going to write Yosef and Ephraim, and put both sticks together, right? Put both sticks together. V'kasher yomru elecha b'nei amcha le'emor halot hagid lanu ma'elelach. When the surrounding people say, what are these to you? Okay. Daber lehem ko amar Adonai Elohim hinei ani lokech et etz Yosef asher b'yad Ephraim v'shiftei Yisrael chaverav v'natati otam alav et etz Yehuda v'asitim le'etz echad v'yu echad b'yadi. Right? He says, say to them, this is what God's saying. I'm going to take the stick of Yosef, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and all the tribes of Israel, and I'm going to put them with the stick of Yehuda, and I'm going to make them one stick. They're going to be one stick in my hand, right? And he says, and the sticks that you write on them should be in front of them. In other words, you could show them the sticks, right? V'daber alehem ko amar Adonai Elohim hinei ani lokech et bnei Yisrael mimena goyim asher lechusham v'kibatzti otam misaviv v'heveti otam el admatam. He says, and now those all the children of Israel have been scattered. I'm going to take them and I'm going to bring them together, and I'm going to bring them to their land, right? And I'm going to make them one nation in the land. And one king will be the king for them. In other words, they will no longer be two nations. They're never going to split into two kingdoms again. They're going to be one kingdom, and they're not going to be cause impurity with their idol worship. And I'm going to purify them. They're going to be my nation. I'm going to be their God, and my servant David will rule over them, right? And they're going to go in my law. So this is the perfect future. And again, he does it with a symbolic action, because the symbolic action is supposed to make this concrete. Show them the sticks, right? Now, to us, it seems a little strange. Big deal, you got sticks. No, the same way he did a siege in front of them, and he didn't warn his wife in front of them. All these things that he didn't do in front of them, now show them the sticks and say, God says he's going to join us together again. He's going to bring us back to the land, and we will have this beautiful future. Okay. And that's a big part, the fact that he did these concrete actions that foretold the destruction. And now he's doing a concrete action that foretells the return. And that's very important. The same way that with Yirmiyahu, it was very important for him to buy Hanamel's field in front of everyone, because a day will come when we once more buy and sell land in Israel, or maybe mainly buy, right, land in the land of Israel, right? So Yechezkel here is showing them, see these sticks? right? This is the nation of Israel. We're going to be together again. We're going to be back in our land, right? And this is a key part of symbolic actions, particularly, I mean, especially in Ezekiel, where things are so concrete. You were doing things to show how concretely that destruction would come. Now you're doing something concretely to show that that there will be a salvation to everyone, return to the land. There will be a return. The same way, and when we talk later about the prophecy of, and I'm not sure exactly when, but we're going to get to it. When we talk about the prophecy of the dry bones, we're going to see how also you kind of the same way Ezekiel has these very vivid visions, right? Very vivid visions of God leaving the temple, very vivid visions about what the horrible things are going to the temple. That once you get to the stage of now the people need to be comforted, there are tremendously concrete visions that say, we will come back to life. We are going to, you say you're dry bones, you say you have no hope. I'm telling you, God's going to bring you back to life, right? Yes, that is the story of the dry bones, right? The dry bones come back to life. Why are they coming back to life? Because you say our hope is gone, of that tikvatenu, right? Our hope is gone. We've got no life left. And I'm saying to you that God will bring you back to life, and you're going to return to the land. And that is, I think, especially for Ezekiel, it's a big part of these symbolic actions, is to concretize the prophecy that he's giving. So, thank you for joining me, everyone.